Hey folks, Brian here again with more role-playing Runequest, role-playing in Glorantha. Excuse me. This session's all about sorcery. Excuse me, my goodness. And it may run long. Hard to tell. Some of my cards are long, some of them are short, so we'll see how things go. But they start off the sorcery section with an explanation of what sorcery is, about how it's impersonal, the immutable laws of nature, not nature, but immutable, based on immutable laws. And it's an act of logical manipulation to create and affect the spell. That sorcery is the most flexible and potentially the most powerful form of magic in Runequest. They go into a little bit in the history about during the Second Age. The God Learners created unique and powerful spells that changed the landscape of the world. That sorcery is the dominant magic system of the Malioni. There we go. Malioni, which is all in the West. Their kingdoms are in the West. And sorcery is generally feared by everybody because of the whole God Learner stuff that happened earlier. But it can be found in Cathalia and the Lunar Empire, and even the Lankermai cult teaches limited forms of sorcery. They do state that this chapter is the bare bones of the sorcery system, and that in future supplements they'll be expounded upon. That's one of my pet peeves. If you're going to give me a game system, give me a game system. But I can see where you'd have a supplement or an expansion on the West dealing specifically with the Malioni, and so that you'd have more sorcery stuff in there. It does make a little bit of sense to me, so I'm not too upset about that. Okay, the use of sorcery. It's a complex logical formula that must be mastered precisely to manipulate runes and techniques. Sorcery spells are treated just like skills. Each individual spell has its own skill, or own percentage chance of doing it correctly, kind of thing. And that's skill to channel your psychic energy, your magic points, to create or cause an effect. Okay, runes are used extensively in sorcery, but these are not, or have nothing to do with your runic affinities. The runes in sorcery are not skills. Sorcerers master runes sufficiently to understand and to manipulate them, or they don't. They divide runes in sorcery between elemental runes, power runes, and form runes. That's similar to our affinities, but not exactly the same because they specifically separate power and form. Sorcerer's understanding of runes does not have any personality or psychological implications. Now, what you do with those spells may have some implications. And every sorcerer starts out with at least with mastery in at least one rune. Now, we'll get to this a teeny bit, well, at the end. The spells, sorcery spells, have one or more runes associated with each spell, and one or more techniques associated with each spell. And so you have to have mastery in the runes and techniques required for that spell in order to learn that spell. So that's how it comes about. And they got a whole, I don't know, call it weird. It reminds me of Elric or Stormbringer. More Stormbringer than Elric. There are differences between the two systems that they made in dealing with this whole, based on intelligence, you get to learn so much at intelligence levels, that kind of thing. We'll get to that. Okay, elemental runes. Your elemental runes are represented by a pentagram that's called the Zaber's Sigil. So each point of the pentagram is a major rune, and it's associated to two other runes, which are then considered minor runes to that major rune. Now, are all the minor runes major runes? Are all the major runes minor runes? Yes, depends on what you have your mastery in. And they give some examples. So you can set up your own sigil if you want. Plus, there is the moon rune. If you are going to cast, because if you have mastery in a major, you have mastery in your major runes. By definition, that's what it is. When you master a rune, it's your major rune. You then have access to, you can You have access to and can cast spells that use your minor runes. It's just if you do that, it costs you twice as much magic points, or twice as many magic points. And that mechanic is duplicated all throughout this. Okay, power runes. Power runes are paired. So if you learn the mobility rune, you also know the stasis rune. However, the stasis rune is a minor rune compared to your major rune that you have mastery in, and therefore if you cast a spell with your minor rune, the spell cost is twice as many magic points. There are 6 techniques, 4 of which are paired. The compared ones are combine and separate and summon and dismiss. But then you also have command and tap. Excuse me. And again, if you have mastery in one paired set, or one side of a paired set, you know the other side of that paired set. However, those are minor for you, and therefore they cost twice as many magic points to cast. Okay, mastering runes and techniques. You have to have minimum intelligence of 13. This is where the whole Elric thing comes in, or Stormbringer rather. You have to have a minimum intelligence of 13. If you got that 13 intelligence, you can master one rune and one technique. For each point of intelligence over that, 14 or more, you can then master an additional rune or technique. So if you have an 18 intelligence, you'll have a total of 7 runes and techniques that you have mastered. And there's a process of mastering a new rune or technique. It takes intelligence plus power as a percentile roll, and the sacrifice of 1 point of power. Okay, manipulating spells. Every spell is going to have an intensity. That intensity represents the baseline of strength, range, and duration of 1. They're all start off with 1, right? But you can increase that strength to 2, 3, or 4. Or you can increase that range to 2, 3, or 4. Or you increase that duration to 2, 3, or 4. Well, not really. Intensity of 2, 3, or 4. Up to your free intelligence. And your free intelligence, they specify this a couple of times, except for 1 point up, 1 point down later. That is your intelligence minus all the spirit magic you know. So if you've got intelligence of 14, you know heal 2, you've only got 12 points of free intelligence. And then they have a list of tables there for strength, range, and duration, that if you increase intensity on strength for so many points, this is what its effects will be. If you increase the range by so many points, intensity for range by so many points, increase the range. And it's not linear, and it's not a curve anyway. It's a weird stagger kind of thing. And it's different for each one. For example, range. Base range is 10. If you put an extra point of intensity into range, it's 20. If you put another point of intensity into range, it's 30, which is the 20 plus 10. And the next one is 50, the 30 plus the 20. So it's the 2 previous ones. That's just the technique they did for range. Okay, casting spells. When you cast a spell, you go into a semi-trance. Your conscious mind is focusing on the rune or runes for that spell, while your subconscious mind is using the technique to manipulate it. And again, each spell is its own skill, so you have to make your own roll for each one. Okay, spell cost. It costs 1 magic point for each rune and 1 magic point for each technique. And looking through it, there's some that have 2 techniques, some that have 2 runes. Most of them just have 1 rune and 1 technique. But there's that. So there's a baseline cost of 2 or 3 kind of thing. Plus 1 magic point for every intensity over 1, because the baseline is in intensity 1, which is sucked up in your whole rune plus technique cost. Okay, casting time. Sorcery spells take an entire melee round to cast. So when do they go off? The next round at your dex strike rank, plus 2 strike ranks for every magic point used to cast a spell. So baseline 2 or 3, that'd be 2 or 3 plus 2, that'd be 5, plus your best strike rank was probably 3, so that's 8, strike rank 8 on the second round. So there's some built-in I don't call it weaknesses, but yeah, weaknesses in casting sorcery spells. But they've got some ways around it. They've got built in the system. They don't really point out to you, but if you start working things out, you can figure it out. Okay, determining success, like we said, each sorcery spell is its own skill, so you have to roll percentile on that spell. But your success percent chance can be increased or augmented by meditation, ritual, and unique for sorcery, time, place, and item bonuses, and like anything else, rune affinities and passion rolls. Okay, so you make your roll, you spend your magic points. If it's a crit, it only costs you 1 magic point, period. If it's a failure, it only costs you 1 magic point, but nothing happens. But if it's a fumble, it'll cost you all the magic points you were planning on spending. And again, spells go off. Okay. Concentration. And obviously, when you've got something that's going to take you a full round plus to cast, this whole concentration thing, plus the whole deal about being in a semi-trance comes into play here. So while you are casting a spell, you are limited to just simple actions. Nod your head yes or no, answering simple questions, moving your hand, that kind of thing, right? No attacks, no parries, no dodging. And if you take damage, you have to make a concentration roll, which is your intelligence times 3%. So it doesn't matter. You can stick with 1 point or 15. It's still intelligence times 3%. I would modify that by the amount of damage you take by 1%. That's just me. So if you took 1 point damage, that'd be minus 1%. If you took 10 points of damage, minus 10%. Now, I might apply that before your armor protects you, because it's an impact on you as a distraction. So if you're standing there in full plate, which absorbs 6 or whatever, and you do 6 points of damage to him, he doesn't take any real damage. Do you still make the intelligence roll? I would. Okay. If you don't make your intelligence roll, you will lose your concentration. You will abort the spell. No magic point cost there, though. And you automatically lose concentration when you go into shock or unconsciousness. Duh. Okay. Spell limits. You are limited to the amount of intensity you can put into your spell based upon your free intelligence, which we talked about before, which is your intelligence minus any spirit magic you have, right? If you decide to abort your spell on purpose, it costs you 1 magic point plus all the time that you wasted until you decided to abort. Okay, boosting spells. Just like with spirit magic and rune magic, you can boost the spells to get through defenses. And for each magic point you put into your boosting, you add 2 more strike ranks to the time it takes to cast a spell. Okay, incompatible spells. If it's not obvious to you what an incompatible spell is, they spell it out for you. Some spells cannot be cast on the same target at the same time. Hence, they're incompatible. Okay, so they talk about, okay, so what's the effect? Well, the spell that has the highest magic points is the one that takes effect. I might play with the idea that's actually the one with the highest strength intensity. But, that's just me. If it's a tie, then they say the one's already on. But if you don't have one already on, but you have 2 people casting during the same round, one goes before the other, I came out with the one that was cast first. If they're the same amount of strength amount of magic points, the one that went off first is the one that would stay. It would take effect. Okay, then talk about time, places, and components. And I actually stuck on my note card here runic time, because we're talking about runes here. Each day, each week, and each season has a rune associated with it. So you're going to get a modifier. If you're casting a fire-based rune on fire day, a fire week, a fire season, it's going to be fairly easy to cast, right? And that's the way it's set up. So you get modifiers anywhere from plus 25 to minus 35, because every rune has its opposite. So if I'm casting a water rune spell during fire week, it's not going to go so well. Okay, runic places. There are places that are minor, major, or that have minor, major, or great association to certain runes. And you get modifiers, plus 10, plus 20, plus 30. Okay, components. You can have mundane or magical components. And each rune has got things that are associated with it. And there's, you know, a table for that. If it's a mundane item that you're using to help cast your spell, plus 10. If it's magical, plus 20. I did look through this again to see if, you know, is it like consumed during the spell casting, but I don't think so. No, it's just, you know, using it. Okay, so how do we learn sorcery? Sorcery is a literate art. Therefore, you are limited to your spell casting percentages by your read and write skill. If your read write skill is 10, you can't cast any spells that are greater than 10%. I love that. Okay, then they give 4 examples, and these are the ones they discuss, you know, in the manuscript, or have discussed. 4 examples of sorcery in Glorantha. The first is the Malioni, which we talked about, referred to being that kingdoms off to the west. They teach their children who have intelligence of 16 or more. They get selected by age 5. And at age 13, they get to select 3 runes and 2 techniques that they get to master. Now, the Malioni have a sorcery cast, and they have certain restrictions. And as long as you maintain those restrictions, you get a bonus to your free intelligence, which makes them even better wizards or sorcerers, whatever you call them. Aeolianism. These are the folks at Cathela. They teach their children from about age 6 until 16. At 16, if they have a minimum intelligence of 14, they get to select 2 runes and 1 technique, and then those are then mastered by the time they turn age 21. The Lancromai cult, on initiation, which is age 16 if I remember right, they are taught the mastery of the truth rune and the command technique. And they have a limited number of spells. Actually, in the book, they tell you which ones Lancromai has access to. Okay, lunar sorcery. They have numerous schools. The typical schools are based on the runes of the moon, fire, sky, or the darkness runes. They have all the power runes, plus the chaos rune. And they have a little table there about moon rune spells, because moon rune based spells are affected by the phase of the moon. If it's a full moon, your magic points cost is in half. And it goes through a couple different phases up to the dying of the black moon, where it costs you twice as much. Okay, so how do we learn new spells? Well, you can train under a sorcerer, in which case you learn the spell, and you start with a base percentage of your bonus plus 1d6. So not very good. Or if you've got spells in a spell book or in some tomes or scrolls or anything else that you can then use personal research on, that takes an intelligence times 3 roll to learn. And if you do, you get the d6, you know, plus your bonus. So same starting percentage, just with a sorcerer being taught, you automatically learn it. If you're doing it on your own, intelligence times 3. Okay, memorizing spells. This is something I remembered from Runequest 3, because your free intelligence, you were limited. Your free intelligence was reduced by the number of spells that you knew, that you had active in your head. Made sense to me. I had no problems with that. And it says here that you can never know more sorcery and spirit magic than you have intelligence. It's the first time sorcery has been mentioned with intelligence, right? Each sorcery spell currently memorized takes 1 point of free intelligence. That's the first time it's mentioned, even though we talked about free intelligence twice already. Now, you can learn more sorcery spells than that. You just kind of dump them off into long-term memory or something, so you can't really pull them up. They get stuck in the bottom shelf. But you can use meditation to then bring one up into current, or CPU if you want to call it that, current access. But again, you have to have the free intelligence to be able to hold that spell. So you have to have at least 1 point of free intelligence available to then recover one of those spells you had known before but have been suppressed. Okay, and here's the technique they use to help compensate for all that kind of stuff. Inscribing spells. Knowledge of a spell, a sorcery spell, can be inscribed into an item through the ritual enchantment. You do that instead of using a point of free intelligence. However, when you do that, you must sacrifice a point of power, but you can add power sacrifices to the enchantment to increase its intensity, either its strength or its range or its duration. Very, very handy. And when I saw that, I started thinking about, the whole wizards with the wand or the cap with the things on it, or maybe even the robe and that kind of thing. I wouldn't call them, fetishes or anything, but stuff that you've inscribed your spells into. So I don't remember any of the sorcery spells offhand, but there's damage reduction kind of stuff and damage increasing kind of stuff. And if you inscribe that spell onto your weapons or whatever, that you can, depending upon how much power increase rolls you're making and able to recover quickly or recover efficiently, you can dump a bunch of power so that strength increase, strength intensity is already way up high, or the duration is up. So if you got it up, 9 points of intensity on duration gives you a day. So assuming you can cast a spell every day, and if you got that 9 points of power into that intensity, there's some cool stuff you can do if you start playing with that kind of deal. Okay, however, if your inscription gets destroyed, you lose use of that spell until you can, do the memory recall thing. Okay, and they have a little section there on creating new spells and how long it takes and that kind of stuff. And then you got the whole section of sample sorcery spells. And I was almost disappointed. I mean, I liked some of the Runequest 3 spells, sorcery spells. I mean, they made sense to me. They're essentially duplicating spirit and rune magic, in the sorcery way. So I didn't have an issue with that. And they didn't seem to do too much of that in this one. And a whole lot of stuff about travel. Well, especially ships on the water. All kinds of spells about that kind of stuff. But anyway, so they have a whole list of the sorcery spells, and of course tells you what runes are associated with it, what techniques are associated with it. Is it active or passive? Does it have a range and duration? That kind of stuff. Okay, the next section after that is equipment and wealth. I'm not going to cover that at all. So the next section will be between adventures. I want to cover that because it talks about experience rolls and increasing stats, all kind of stuff. So that's what the next one will be. Between adventures. Getting better. Until then, happy gaming. Ciao.